Hello friends, my name is Daniel Weber. I still remember very clearly the day I made the worst decision of my life. The day I decided to move to a small town deep in the Black Forest in southern Germany. The name of the town was Rosenfeld. Looking at a map, it was a place so small it was almost invisible. I was a freelance graphic designer. As long as I had internet, I could live anywhere in the world. I was tired of big cities. The noise, the traffic, the people. I needed a quiet place. And that house I saw on the website, the title of the listing is still in my mind. Old German house in the forest, very affordable price. The photos were a bit dark, but the house was truly large. It was an old two-story structure with stone walls. The strangest part was the price. It was incredibly cheap for a house like that. But back then I didn't wonder why. It was nearly evening when I arrived in the town of Rosenfeld. The weather was cold. The sky was covered with gray clouds. There were only a few streets in the town, a grocery store, a small gas station, and an old bar. I stopped my car in front of the grocery store and went inside. The old man at the register looked at me. "Can I help you?" he said. I said, "I rented the old Weber house in the forest. I came to get the key." The man's face changed instantly. He looked at me as if I had said something wrong. "Are you moving there?" he asked. "Yes." He remained silent for a while. Then he took a key out of a drawer. As he handed me the key, he said, Some things might be strange." I laughed. "It's an old house, it's normal." The man shook his head slowly. "No, not because it's old." I didn't ask any more questions. I wish I had. The house was about 10 minutes outside of town, somewhere inside the forest. The road was narrow and dark. The trees were so thick that even my headlights couldn't penetrate the darkness. Finally, I saw the house. It was exactly like in the photos, but something was different. The house looked as if no one had visited it for a very long time. The grass in the garden had grown long. The windows were dark. I got out of the car. The forest was completely silent. There wasn't even the sound of a bird. I went to the door and turned the key. The door creaked open. As I stepped inside, the smell of old wood hit my nose, but the house was cleaner than I expected. It was as if someone had cleaned it recently. Strange, I thought. I turned on the lights. The living room was quite large. There was an old German-style fireplace, a wooden staircase leading up, and a locked door at the end of the hallway. As I looked at that door, a strange feeling formed inside me, but I was tired. I had driven 700 kilometers that day. I carried my suitcase upstairs and entered the bedroom. It was around 10:30 p.m. My phone had signal. There was internet too. Everything is normal, I thought. But that night, when it was 03:17, everything would change. I was in a deep sleep. A sound woke me up. Thud. I opened my eyes. The room was dark. I looked at my phone. Time 03:17. Then I heard that sound again. Thud, as if someone downstairs was hitting something. The first thing I thought was, maybe a tree branch is hitting the window. But the sound was coming from below. I got out of bed. I opened the door. The hallway was dark. I looked down the stairs. The living room was completely dark. But I noticed something. The locked door at the end of the hallway, it was no longer closed. It was slightly ajar. A dark void was visible through it. And at that moment, I heard a very slow whisper from inside the door. "Daniel." My heart was beating so fast it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I had moved into that house only 6 hours ago, and there was no one in town who knew my name. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs. The door at the end of the hallway, it was truly open now. I was sure I had seen that door locked just a few hours ago. I was certain of it. But now the door was slightly ajar and a completely dark room was visible inside. My heart was racing. For a while I tried to find logical explanations. Maybe the door wasn't closed properly. Maybe the wind opened it. But then I realized something. There was no wind in the house. All the windows were closed. And most importantly, that whisper I just heard. "Daniel," it had said my name. I didn't know anyone here. I slowly began to walk down the stairs. Every step creaked. The house seemed to make noise as if it wanted to announce my every move. When I reached the middle of the living room, I stopped. I looked at the door in the hallway. The door seemed to have opened a bit more. Now I could make out the silhouette of an old desk inside. I took a deep breath. "This is ridiculous," I whispered. Maybe the landlord had locked one of the rooms, but I had a strange feeling, as if I didn't want that room to be open. Still, I succumbed to my curiosity. I walked toward the door with slow steps. When I got to the door, my hand went to the handle. It was cold, much colder than normal. I opened the door a bit more. The room was a small study. There was an old desk. On the desk lay yellowed papers and an old desk lamp. There were shelves on the walls, but the shelves were almost empty. The first thing I noticed when I entered the room was that it was extremely cold. It felt much colder than the rest of the house. Just then, thud. A sound came from behind me. I turned quickly. I looked into the hallway. There was nothing, but the door had closed a bit more on its own. My heart raced. For a moment, I thought about leaving the room, but then I noticed the papers on the desk. I picked one up. It was a page from a notebook. There was German writing on it, but an English sentence had been added at the bottom. It starts every night at 3:17. Every night at 3:17 it begins. Suddenly I got goosebumps. I looked at my phone. Time 03:21. I started flipping through the notebook. On most of the pages the same thing was written, the time, dates, and a sentence written over and over again. It is in the walls. Inside the walls. Just then I heard a sound, a very thin sound, as if it were coming from inside the wall. At first I didn't understand, but a few seconds later the sound became clear. It was the sound of someone scratching the wall with their fingernails. Slow, long, a disturbing sound. I approached the wall. The sound was definitely coming from inside the wall. I pressed my ear against it, and at that moment I heard a whisper from inside the wall. "Daniel," I jumped back. I was sure of it now. I was not alone in the house. There was something else on the desk, a folded old newspaper. The date was 1998. I opened the newspaper. The headline caught my attention: "Missing person case in the Rosenfeld Forest House." I began reading the news. The article mentioned a man. His name was Lucas Schneider. According to the newspaper, Lucas lived alone in this house. Neighbors had called the police after not seeing him for weeks. When the police came to the house was completely empty, but there were strange scratches on the walls, and this sentence was written on the wall in the study: "It knows my name. It knows my name." There was a photo at the bottom of the newspaper, a photo of Lucas Schneider. But that wasn't what scared me the most. Someone had written something on the back of the photo with a pen. I slowly turned the photo over. On the back it said, "If someone finds this house, leave before 3:17. If someone finds this house, flee before 03:17. Just then, a very loud sound echoed through the house. Bang! As if a door downstairs had slammed shut with force. The lights flickered, and at that moment, the sound coming from inside the wall became much closer. The scratching sound, it was right in front of me now. I looked at the wall, and what I saw was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen in my life. From inside the wall, a hand was slowly pushing against the wallpaper, as if someone was trying to come out from inside the wall. I stood frozen, staring at the wall. The wallpaper was actually bulging outward, as if someone were pushing from the inside. Then that thing moved. The wallpaper slowly tore. A dirty, pale hand emerged from underneath. The fingers were thin. The nails were unnaturally long. The hand stayed in the air for a few seconds, then it pulled back. The wall became silent again. I couldn't even breathe. What I saw didn't make sense. "This is impossible," I whispered, but my heart was telling me it was real. At that moment, the sentence from the newspaper came to my mind. "It is in the walls, inside the walls." My eyes scanned the walls of the room. Suddenly, I noticed. There were very fine cracks in the walls, as if there were a void inside. And inside that void, something was moving. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. I quickly headed for the door. But just as I was about to reach the door, a sound came from behind me. It wasn't a whisper, it was like a breath. Slow, wet, a cold breath. As if someone were standing right behind me. I slowly turned around. The room was empty, but the tear in the wall had grown. Now I could see the dark void behind the wall. The inside looked completely black, but inside that darkness something moved. I couldn't stand there anymore. I ran out of the room. I crossed the hallway. I stood in the middle of the living room. I was out of breath. I looked at my phone. Time 03:29. Just then I heard another sound. This time the sound was coming from below, but I was already on the ground floor. Then the sound was coming from beneath the house, as if someone were walking under the floor. Slow, heavy steps. Thud, thud, thud. I stood in the middle of the living room and looked at the floor. Some of the wooden floorboards were different from the others. They looked newer. I slowly walked toward those boards. I stepped on them, it creaked, then I stepped again. This time a different sound came, as if there were a void underneath. I knelt down and examined the board. There was a small handle on the edge. My heart raced again. I lifted the board. Underneath was a dark staircase, a stone staircase. It led down beneath the house. Cold air hit my face. But the more terrifying thing were the whispers coming from below. There were multiple voices. But they were all saying the same thing, very slowly in a very muffled way. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. I turned on my phone's flashlight. I looked at the stairs. It was completely dark below, but inside the darkness something moved. It wasn't like a human, but it was the size of a human. My heart was beating so fast I almost fainted. The sentence from the newspaper came to my mind again. Leave before 3:17. Leave before 03:17. But I was still here. And now I understood. Lucas Schneider, he hadn't been able to escape from this house. Just as I was about to close the trapdoor, I noticed something. An old photo was lying by the edge of the stairs. I took the photo. It was an old Polaroid photo. There was a man in the photo. The man was standing in the living room of the house. The same fireplace of this house was visible behind him. When I saw the man's face, I froze. This man was the man in the photo in the newspaper, Lucas Schneider. But he wasn't alone in the photo. On the wall behind him, there was something. At first, I thought it was a shadow, but when I looked closely, I saw it. There was a long, thin shape on the wall, and where that shape was, the wallpaper was torn. I turned the photo over. Only a date was written on it, October 12, 1998, and a single sentence underneath. It came out of the walls. It came out of the walls. Just then, all the lights in the house went out at once. The living room was plunged into total darkness. My phone's light flickered, and at that moment, something began to run up from inside the stairs. Thud, 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 thud. Steps were quickly coming up the stairs, and that thing was screaming my name. Daniel. The steps coming from the stairs were getting faster and faster. Thud, 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 thud. It was as if someone was running on all fours. It didn't sound like human footsteps. In a panic, I tried to close the wooden hatch, but just at that moment, a hand appeared from inside the stairs. That hand, it looked like a human hand, but the fingers were very long. The nails were black and broken. The hand struck the hatch. Bang! I jumped back in fear. Hatch had closed, but scratching sounds were coming from underneath. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was as if that thing was trying to pry the hatch open. I didn't know what to do. I thought about running to the front door. But then I realized the door was no longer closed. The door was open. I had closed it. I was sure of it. But now the door was slowly swaying. And outside the door in the forest, something moved. My headlights were still shining on my car, but a long shadow passed in front of the light. That shadow was not the shadow of a normal human. Its arms were unnaturally long. A second later, the shadow disappeared. Right at that moment, the hatch on the floor suddenly burst open. Bang! The sound of the wooden hatch hitting the floor echoed throughout the house. A very cold air rose from within the stairs. And then silence, complete silence. This was even more terrifying, because now I didn't know where that thing was. While looking for a place to escape, I noticed an old wardrobe in the living room. The wardrobe door was halfway open. I looked inside. There were old papers and a notebook inside. I took the notebook. A name was written on the cover, Lucas Schneider. My heart raced. This was the diary of the man who went missing in this house. I quickly flipped through the pages. The handwriting was very messy, but I could read some sentences. October 3, 1998, I heard the sounds coming from the walls for the first time. At first, I thought it was mice, but mice don't say people's names. October 6, 1998, there is a void behind the wall. At 3:17 a.m., they all wake up. October 9, 1998, I saw him. He looked at me from inside the wall. The next page was almost completely scribbled out, but a single sentence was legible in the middle. It is not alone. Not alone. I opened the last page. The writing was so shaky it was almost unreadable. October 11, 1998, I went under the house. There are tunnels there. They live inside the walls. There was one more sentence, but when I read this sentence, my blood ran cold. They are wearing our faces. Just then, a sound came from behind me. This voice sounded very much like my own voice. Daniel, I froze. I slowly turned around. The living room was empty, but someone was standing at the end of the hallway. I shone my phone's light, and what I saw was something I would never forget for the rest of my life. The thing standing at the end of the hallway looked like me. The same face, the same hair, the same clothes, but its eyes were completely black, and its mouth slowly opened. Then it spoke with my voice. "You're late, Daniel." Right at that moment, another sound came from behind me, this time from the hatch. I slowly turned around. From inside the stairs, something else was coming out, but this time it wasn't just one. Multiple figures were moving in the darkness. The thing standing at the end of the hallway was really me, but at the same time it wasn't me. The same face, the same eyes, the same hair, but the inside of its eyes was pitch black. It was as if it had no eyes. There were just two dark voids. The light of my phone was flickering. That thing slowly tilted its head. Then it spoke with my voice. "Daniel, why did you come?" My voice, but slightly distorted, as if someone was imitating my voice. I took a step back. The sounds coming from the stairs behind me were much closer now. Scratch, scratch, things were climbing up the stairs, but the thing in the hallway was still looking at me. Then it slowly smiled, but that smile did not look like a human smile. It was too wide, it was very strange, as if the facial muscles were attached to the wrong places. Then it said something. "Lucas looked like that too." My heart felt like it was going to stop. "Lucas," I whispered. The thing tilted its head to the side. Then it walked toward the wall in the hallway, and without any effort it walked into the wall, as if the wall were liquid. It disappeared in a second. I stood frozen, but the sound coming from behind me pushed me back into action. The things coming up the stairs had now reached the living room. I slowly turned around. I shone the phone's light on the stairs, and what I saw was much more horrific than the photo in the newspaper. 3 figures stood at the top of the stairs. They were all human height, but their bodies were very thin. Their arms reached almost to their knees, and their faces, it was as if they had no faces, as if their facial skin had melted. But then I realized their faces were actually human faces, but they were attached the wrong way. One's mouth had shifted to the side, one's eye was below its chin, and one looked like Lucas Schneider, the man in the photo from the newspaper, but his face was distorted. That thing took a step toward me, then it spoke, but its voice sounded like the voices of multiple people. "We are not alone." The wall behind me moved. Other hands emerged from the hallway. The wallpaper tore. The house was like a living thing. Whispers rose from inside the walls. "Daniel, Daniel, Daniel." Suddenly I understood. This house was a trap. The things living inside the walls lured people here. Then they took their places. Lucas Schneider hadn't been able to escape because they had taken Lucas's face. And now they wanted my face. I started running toward the door, but just as I was about to reach the door slowly closed. Click. The sound of the lock was heard. Something had locked the door from the outside. There were footsteps behind me, multiple footsteps. I slowly turned around. Those things were walking toward me, but one of them was different. The thing in the very front had my face. It now looked exactly like me, but its eyes were still pitch black. It spoke slowly. "We found a new face." Then it raised its hand, and the wall behind me suddenly opened. Behind the wall was a large tunnel, a dark underground tunnel. Hundreds of whispers were coming from inside. The thing looked at me, then it said, "Now you will come with us too." Right at that moment, something happened in the house. All the walls cracked at the same time. The voices from the tunnel suddenly started screaming, and something much bigger was coming up from the depths of the tunnel. When the wall cracked, the whole house seemed to come alive. The sounds rising from the tunnel, whispers, footsteps, filled the entire living room. The things standing in front of me were being pulled into the tunnel one by one, but the thing in the front, the one with my face, was still looking at me. "You will come," it said. My heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest, but on the other hand, I gathered my strength to escape. I ran toward the mouth of the tunnel. With determination, I jumped down the stairs. I shone my phone's light into the tunnel. The inside was like an endless darkness. As I moved forward, the tunnel widened. The sounds coming from the walls were now surrounding my whole body. The whispers were saying my name. "Daniel, Daniel." The walls of the tunnel were as if they were made of human skin, and these skins were the faces of former victims. Lucas Schneider's face, other faces, they were all together. I understood. These entities do not kill people, they take their faces, and they hide in the walls, waiting for new victims. With every step, the tunnel widened and the walls drew closer to each other. I heard my own breath, my own name, but I was no longer sure of my own voice. In the depths of the tunnel, I saw a light. It was like a room, large and small. In the middle of the room, a notebook lay on an old desk. I opened the notebook. The last pages Lucas wrote. They copy faces. If someone escapes, they take them too. Everything starts at 3:17. I no longer have the strength to escape from here. Right at that moment, a hand emerged from behind the notebook. This hand was the same as mine, but it was cold and dead. A whisper from behind me. "Welcome, Daniel." I slowly turned around. At least 10 figures were standing in the tunnel. They were all human height, all of them with my face, and their eyes were completely dark. My heart was pounding and my legs felt frozen. But with an instinct, I ran to another branch of the tunnel. The figures were following me. I quickly entered a side tunnel. Deep inside, I saw a door. I opened the door. This was like an underground exit. But the view I saw at the exit was not outside the house. It was inside another house deep in the Black Forest. And the whispers rising from the end of the tunnel echoed in all the houses at the same time. "A new face has arrived, a new face has arrived." At that moment, I understood. What happened to Lucas Schneider and what would happen to me, there was no escape. The entities coming out of the walls were slowly coming toward me. I was screaming, I was running, but now I realized they always find us. And here is the last sound I heard. "Daniel, you will stay with us now."